There's a business that looks like this. A few giant signs, a concrete parking lot, 4 or 8 fuel pumps, a convenience store filled with drinks, chips, coffee, and snacks. You pull in, you pump gasoline, you pay, you leave, and somewhere underneath the pavement, thousands of gallons of fuel are being bought and sold every single day. That is the business people imagine when they think about owning a gas station. Buy gasoline cheap, sell it for more, keep the difference. It sounds simple, but here's what actually happens. In 2025, convenience stores in the United States sold about $476 billion worth of fuel. These stores account for roughly 80% of the fuel purchased in America. But fuel represented about 65% of their sales dollars while generating only 38.8% of their gross profit dollars. In other words, the product that brings in most of the money is not necessarily the product that makes most of the money. And that is the first thing most people get wrong about gas stations. Today, we are going inside the real economics of one of the most visible, most competitive, and most misunderstood businesses in America. If you want to see how other ordinary businesses turn simple products into millions of dollars, subscribe to the channel. There's a lot more money hiding in plain sight. Before we talk about profit, you need to understand what a gas station is actually selling. Most people would say gasoline, but gasoline is only part of the business. A modern gas station is really a traffic business disguised as a fuel business. The fuel gets the customer onto the property. Everything else is an attempt to make money from the customer once they arrive. And that distinction explains almost everything that happens inside this industry. Let's start with the gasoline itself. In 2025, the average retail fuel gross margin was about 39.7 cents per gallon. That sounds pretty good until you remember that gross margin is not profit. The station still has to pay for card processing, distribution, labor, electricity, maintenance, equipment, insurance, property costs, and everything else required to keep those pumps operating. NACS estimates retailer expenses to sell fuel at roughly 20 to 25 cents per gallon, with credit card fees alone around 8 cents per gallon. So the station might make only around 15 cents or so of pre-tax profit on a gallon after typical fuel selling expenses. That means the gas station business is not built around making a huge amount of money on each gallon. It is built around selling a lot of gallons. And that brings us to the first major advantage, volume. The average convenience store selling fuel recorded about 322 fueling transactions per day in 2025, with an average fuel transaction of roughly 8.4 gallons. Do the math. That is more than 2,700 gallons moving through one location every day, close to 1 million gallons in a year. Even a relatively small margin becomes meaningful when you multiply it by hundreds of thousands of gallons. But there is a problem. Every gas station in the area is selling essentially the same product. Regular gasoline from one station will get your car to the same destination as regular gasoline from the station across the street. So customers become extremely price sensitive. And this is where gas stations start playing a game that most customers never notice. Price competition. If one station drops its price by 5 cents, the station next door may have to respond, because drivers are willing to change where they stop. Research from NACS found that 72% of drivers consider price the most important factor when choosing where to buy fuel, and 69% said they would drive 5 minutes out of their way to save 5 cents per gallon. That is an enormous problem for the retailer. The station owner wants a higher margin, the customer wants a lower price, and the competitor wants your customer to when gasoline prices rise sharply, something strange can happen. The station does not necessarily make more money. Retailers may actually reduce their margin to avoid losing customers to the station down the road. This is why the economics of gasoline are so different from what people imagine. The station owner is constantly balancing 3 numbers: wholesale cost, local selling price, and customer traffic. Move any one of them too far, and the economics change. But now we get to the part that makes the business really interesting, the store, because the gasoline customer is already there. They have parked their car. They have walked onto the property. And the retailer has one more opportunity to make money. Get them inside. More than half of gas customers, about 62%, go inside the store for something, whether that means buying merchandise, paying at the register, using the bathroom, or using another service. And once that customer walks through the door, the economics change completely. A gallon of gasoline might generate only a relatively small margin that a fountain drink can have a much larger markup. Coffee can have a larger margin. Prepared food can be even more attractive. And this is why modern convenience stores increasingly look less like simple gas stations and more like miniature fast food retailers. Food service has become one of the most important profit engines inside the store. According to NACS, food service represented about 28% of in-store sales in 2025 while contributing 38.3% of in-store gross margin dollars. The fuel gets you there. The food and merchandise are where the economics become much more interesting. Now let us talk about ownership, because despite the giant oil company logos you see everywhere, most gas stations are not actually owned by major oil companies. That NACS estimates that about 95% of convenience stores selling fuel are owned by independent companies, whether they are single-store operators or regional chains. The logo on the sign does not necessarily tell you who owns the property. A station might carry the branding of a major fuel company while being operated by an independent retailer under a particular supply or branding arrangement. And that creates another important distinction. The fuel brand is not always the business owner. The retailer is. Now we need to talk about the part of the business nobody sees. Underneath that parking lot are storage tanks, pipes, pumps, monitoring equipment, and an entire regulatory system. Gasoline is not simply delivered and poured into a tank. Underground storage tanks are subject to federal requirements covering leak detection, spill protection, overfill protection, corrosion protection, operator training, record keeping, and financial responsibility. And this is one of the biggest differences between a gas station and an ordinary retail store. If a convenience store has an old refrigerator, it is an equipment problem. If an underground fuel system leaks, it can become an environmental problem. That means maintenance is not optional. IT is part of the economics of owning the business. Now let us put the entire machine together. Imagine a gas station selling roughly 1 million gallons of fuel a year. A fuel gross margin of about 39.7 cents per gallon. That produces roughly $397,000 of gross fuel margin. That sounds impressive, but after fuel-related operating expenses, the actual contribution from gasoline can be dramatically smaller. And remember, the station still has rent or a mortgage, employees, utilities, maintenance, insurance, equipment costs, taxes, and every other expense associated with operating a physical location. This is why the best gas stations are not necessarily the ones selling gasoline at the highest price. They're the ones with the best combination of traffic, fuel volume, pricing discipline, and inside store spending. A station on a major highway might have enormous fuel volume. A station in a neighborhood might have fewer gallons, but stronger convenience store sales. Another location might survive because it has a restaurant attached. Another might make money from car washes. Another might specialize in fleet customers and diesel. The building may look almost identical. The economics can be completely different. And there's another threat coming from a direction the industry cannot ignore: electric vehicles. Gasoline demand is not disappearing overnight. But fuel retailers are already dealing with changing driving patterns, improving fuel economy, and growing EV adoption. NACS has noted that gasoline demand appears to be declining compared with pre-pandemic levels, while EV adoption is increasing and retailers are considering whether charging infrastructure represents a new opportunity. That creates an interesting problem. The traditional gas station was designed around one basic behavior. You drive in, you refuel quickly. You leave. An electric vehicle changes the economics because charging can take considerably longer. And if a customer is going to stay for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, or longer, the retailer suddenly has a different opportunity. Coffee, food, shopping, bathrooms. Wi-Fi. Everything that can turn waiting time into spending time. The gas station of the future may not be built around gasoline at all. IT may be built around what happens while the customer is there. And that brings us back to the real secret behind the business: that a gas station is not really a gasoline business. Gasoline is the traffic generator. The real business is controlling a valuable piece of roadside real estate, bringing drivers onto it, and making money from everything they do once they arrive. That is why a station can sell millions of dollars worth of gasoline and still have surprisingly thin fuel profits. And it is why the most successful operators obsess over things that have almost nothing to do with the pump itself. Location, traffic, pricing, food, merchandise, labor, and the number of customers who walk through the front door after they finish filling the tank. The next time you stop at a gas station, look at it differently. The pumps are not necessarily where the money is. They're the reason you came, and the store is waiting for what you do next.